If your pharma brand really wants to have a breakthrough, if there's anything that we've learned over the last several months, it's that we have to shift to continuous engagement. There's going to be a fundamental change in our campaigns when it comes to engaging the customer, because some of the tools and the tactics we've had previously, they just can't be relied on. And there's too much uncertainty against very, very high stakes, which causes us to rethink a lot about what we do when it comes to engaging with our customers. Let's go into the table stakes just a little bit more. Recently, one of the large consulting firms talked about launch brands that came out since COVID. From the launch of COVID, whenever they came out through 2025, they're trying to put an economic number to it. And they believe that $19 billion worth of revenues are going to be interrupted as it relates to the new environment that we're operating in. When it comes to brands that are already in market, the total disruption looked at by another consulting firm equaled almost $32 billion. That's a lot of interruption, that is for sure. And as we listen to earnings call after earnings call, surprisingly, even as recently as the last few weeks, we continue to hear companies talk about when they're not making their number, it's because of some marketplace struggles, whether it's the patient, the payer, or the provider. Quite frequently, there are challenges in getting the message to go ahead, to stick, to resonate, and to turn into action. So if we're going to shift our campaigns to continuous customer engagement, we need a framework for thinking about it, as well as some evidence to help make sure everyone knows why we should go ahead and do that. So I want to bring in an expert on that. It's the Chief Innovation Officer at Relevate Health. It's our good friend. He's back once again, Hans Kaspersetz. Hans, welcome.
Hey, Frank, how are you? It's good to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
It's great to have you here because it's so timely. There's a lot of our community in biopharma and medtech are thinking about, what do I need to do different that's going to be successful? And there's been enough time, enough pilots have gone by that we've either grown frustrated with things that we can't quantify, and most importantly, we need to go to our senior leadership and talk about what is really going to work. And if the last I checked the calendar here in early September, we need to have our final draft of our brand plans and budget requests in the next few weeks. So we really need the help here, Hans. What are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, we're going to talk a bunch of things. First of all, I mean, I have some data that I'm going to share with the group around launches and the impact in HCP engagement as well as revenue. We're going to talk about a framework that can be applied using a mix of technology and tactics to increase engagement and deliver meaningful ROI. And, one of the things that I think is worth thinking about is, traditionally, a lot of programs have been designed in a way that it's very difficult to measure the ROI, especially big national campaigns where you slather the entire country in the same set of tactics. And so as we move into this continuous engagement environment and we start to build highly relevant content that's targeted at specific physicians, we end up in a place where we can really measure the impact of the content on the physicians, on TRX, on the performance of the brand. And that's one of the things that excites me most about joining Relevate Health, is that all of our work is done in a way that nets us in a place where we can measure ROI, which is something that our traditional competitors have been unable to do. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about. How do we know where to put our money? How are we going to maximize the return? And how are we going to drive brand performance as the changes that we're enduring, we're sort of going through, are accelerated by COVID and other things?
Well, if you can address that, that would be a win for today, Hans, because when I think about the last 5 capabilities presentations I've seen, I just think to myself, wait, if I added the 5% lift we're going to get with this, the 3% lift we're going to get with that, the reduced drop off with that thing, it's like, wow, I don't know if this calculus makes any sense. We don't even need a marketing team anymore. It would just use all these solutions. So if you can help quantify it, I think you're going to make a lot of people really happy today. So let's have some fun. I know you've got some things you're going to share with us. We can bring that up on screen whenever you're ready.
All right, let's go for it. Thanks, Frank.
Yeah.
All right, guys and girls, thanks for the opportunity to meet with you. We got 31 slides. I'm going to try to do it in 45 minutes. Nobody really wants to sit through an hour presentation, not for me at least. And we're going to talk about the things we just talked about. How do we generate lift? How do we generate ROI? And how do we generate continuous engagement so our audience stays engaged, right? And really what this comes down to is shifting from campaigning to continuous customer engagement. And the way I try to describe this is, historically, pharma campaigns have been like couture fashion, right? Really big, heavy campaigns, took a lot of work to bring to it, really gorgeous. You launch them, you see how they perform for 6 months, and then you go out and do it all over. But we know that the world has changed. We know that people want snackable, modular content. And so the way I think about the world today is like fast fashion, right? Uniqlo, H&M, content that is relevant right now on the channel that the physician is in at the time they need to consume it, right? And it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be heavy, but it has to be highly relevant. So that's what we're going to talk about. All right, how do I get my slide to change? There we go. All right, so as we were brainstorming this presentation, we realized that COVID is eating our launch, right? And it's just a really funny play on words, right? COVID has accelerated trends that we saw in the market even before 2020. And, as we look at it, we know that, data that we saw around the failure to launch or failure to meet forecasts, right, for many, many products has been continued over the last year. And so I want to tell you a quick story about my son, Griffin. COVID robbed his successful launch into middle school this year. On the very first day of middle school, he went to middle school. He starts the process of learning, how to, move his books and go to his locker and change classrooms, all those really important launch lessons, right? All that communication that the school was going to share with him, because he was exposed to COVID on the first day of school. He was then quarantined for 14 days, and he's had to do the last 14 days worth of schoolwork from behind a computer. And his ability to interact with his peers, his teachers, the administrators in the school is no different than our field sales team's ability to interact with HCPs in the field. It's just dead comparatively, right? I mean, we have the technology, we have the content, it should work, but the reality is it's not as rich as an in-person meeting. And so, COVID has accelerated many, many of these changes, and we still haven't quite grasped how to optimally engage with our physician audiences. And so, there's a couple of facts that I think are worth sharing. First, between 2009 and 2017, 40% of product launches, RX product launches, failed to meet their 2-year their sales forecasts. When we bring that forward today, I actually took a look at the top 15 launches, and there were 59 drug approvals in 2020. And I looked at the top 15, and there was a meaningful fraction of them that also failed to meet their launch year forecasts. And Velcluri is one of those brands, right? It actually missed its launch forecast by $800 million. It was forecasted to do something like 2.5 billion or 2.7 billion, and it hit 1.9 billion in the first year. That is a massive gap, and that's a massive amount of revenue that's lost for that brand. By number 15, by revenue, we're talking about a product that had $30 million in revenue in the first year. And that's in the first 3 quarters of the year. And at that point, when you miss by half, the impact is even bigger, right? Those smaller companies, those smaller brands need every single dollar in order to create the launch trajectory that they're going to need to be successful. When we look at data from McKinsey, they're estimating that the impact of COVID to pharma is greater than $10 billion in the last year. And that's a huge amount of money, right? And the impact to the world, right, to broadly speaking, is that's $10 billion that can't be invested in R&D. That's $10 billion that is no longer returned to shareholders. And so it actually damages the virtuous cycle of innovation. And so as we think about this, we're all leaving money on the table as pharma marketers and as branders and as people who are commercializing products. And there's lots and lots of opportunities there. So what's the first impact? First of all, there's increased opportunity with diminished relevance. So what does this mean? 61% of HCPs say they communicate more with reps thanks to virtual meetings, right? And so we saw the trend of engagement falling pre-COVID. We get online, we're using Viva Engage, Zoom, other technologies, and now the physicians are reporting they're communicating more. Now that's really important. However, 57% of those surveyed physicians, right, this is an Accenture study, report that nonetheless, even that sales reps are failing to understand how to effectively communicate with them. And so sales reps have great materials, they have CBAs, they have Viva, et cetera, but they are not completely tech enabled and data enabled in a way that allows them to listen closely to the physician so that they understand the timing, the thematic interest, and the way to deliver the messaging. And so what's the first sort of thing? The first inspiration, right? Well, we need to listen to HCPs to better understand them and their needs. Maybe that goes without saying, but we now have the technology to do that. Impact number two, we have restricted rep access. 43% of HCPs are restricting rep access. This isn't really news, but it's nice. It's good to see the number there, right? 44% of HCPs are restricting rep access for the foreseeable future. Now, the scary number is that 28% of HCPs are restricting rep access permanently. And so what does that mean, right? That means that we actually need to do a better job of locating the HCP networks of influence so that we can cut through the noise and enhance access and engagement. Rather than the rep communicating everything, how do we use physicians' peers and peer networks to do a better job? How do we use MSLs to do a better job? And how do we optimize those relationships to increase engagement? And we're going to talk about that today. Impact number three, increased virtual preference. 48% of reps want a hybrid of both live and virtual meetings. The nice thing about this is that we know that physicians get a lot of value out of interacting with reps and getting the educational content and learning about the products, learning about efficacy and safety and dosing, et cetera. And also they want their samples so that they can give them to their patients. And it's good to see that this number is a big number. 39% of HCPs want rep meetings to be all virtual. So we have a split audience, right? We have some folks who want all virtual. And what we learned yesterday when we looked at the data is that they engage for a long time. I looked at data from Viva that said that the typical virtual rep meeting is 13 minutes on Viva Engage, which is really, really remarkable, right? There are fewer meetings, but the meetings are much, much longer. The last piece of data I want to share here is that 10% of HCPs want no rep meetings at all. Now, these are folks that we're going to have to engage through other channels in ways such as near personal promotion, non-personal promotion, digital, and other channels. But we have to understand who that 10% is, and then how are we going to engage with them? And so what's the insight here, right? We need to lead by continuously engaging HCPs with the themes, content, and on the channels of their preference. How do we do that, right? We need a mechanism so that we can listen to and analyze very large sets of thematic data and interest data so that we can reduce it down and determine what is exactly the right message for the right HCP at the right time. So what are the permanent impacts that we need to think through, right? First of all, the pandemic is accelerating lasting changes in what healthcare providers need and value. Second, pharma companies are starting to redefine the relevance in this new landscape. And so if you move quickly and you have first mover advantage, you can outcompete your competitors, right? You can get a competitive advantage still. Not everybody's made this move. This is like back in the day when we introduced responsive websites and mobile first, right? There were some folks that were ahead of the curve. Virtual engagement with reps is permanent. I think also virtual schooling is permanent and requires new ways of creating meaningful connections. How do we understand, how we engage with an HCP at a meeting, at a dinner? We just heard about pharma's new guidelines that we're going to have to adhere to next year. How do we then engage them post-meeting or post-dinner with content that's relevant to what they heard, is rep triggered, and is personalized to them so that it breaks through the noise? How do we use local data and local relevance to drive engagement? Finally, diminished rep access creates a need for brands to engage continuously with HCPs to keep their interest and attention. We know HCPs are searching for information We know that they are information hungry. They're also overwhelmed with noise. And so how can pharma come together? How can we think through the challenge of creating modular content using, say, a content pipeline, and then pairing it with locally relevant data, highly relevant content to a specific physician, and then put it in front of them or deliver it from somebody that they are very likely to engage with that content from? And this is really one of the ways we think through social networks and how we think about spheres of influence, right? It creates a tremendous amount of opportunity. So it begs the question, how do we create continuous engagement with brands that can deliver up to 17-to-1 ROI, which is a pretty remarkable number if you ask me, right? And the answer is simple but not easy. Frank said this to me yesterday or earlier. NPP 2.0. And we're going to be evolving from non-personal promotion to near personal promotion. And that is really the key to continuous engagement, right? Every message needs to be customized in some way, doesn't have to be fully personalized, to meet the needs and interests of our physician target, right? And one of our products called Practice Share does that, right? We take your national campaign and then we pair it with locally relevant content, and then we deliver it from a local KOL so that we facilitate this exchange between these two peers so that they're more likely to engage with that content. That generates more behavioral change. Now, if you do that continuously, and I don't mean overwhelming them, we talked about that yesterday as well, but you do it in a very sort of systematic and thoughtful way, we can engage with those physicians between those MSL visits, between the field sales visits, and between those dinners in a way that creates behavioral change. So how do we do it, right? Well, Relevate Health has spent several years developing something called the L-cubed framework. It's a proven tech-enabled methodology that delivers brand performance in the wake of these trends, really as a reaction to them. And this is based on something called L, which is our Elevated Relevance Platform, right? This is a set of technologies and a database of 1.2 million physicians that enables us to optimize our workflow, optimize our physician engagement, target those physicians, and then collect first-party data and really, really hone in on what it is that we need to be saying to those physicians and when. So what's the first piece, right? The first piece is listen. Our word embedding analysis and lexical analysis tool allows us to peer deeply into the conversations that HCPs, patients, and the industry are having around, leveraging LexEdge and therapeutic expertise and machine learning. Jesus, I've really screwed that one up, Frank. Essentially, what we have is machine learning, natural language processing technology that allows us to scrape the web and social platforms so that we can aggregate very large sets of content so that topics that are important to our audiences emerge naturally through something called topic modeling, so that we can then go into the market and generate content that's reflective and responsive to that. The second part is our locate practice, right? And it's locate. We have about 10 years building a database of 1.2 million physicians, which allows us to do spheres of influence mapping and thematic analysis around physician interests, right? And what this does, it answers two questions. Number one, which markets and which physicians are most likely to be influenced? Who can we change behavior? And then number two, who needs to deliver that message to generate the maximum behavioral change? The third component is lead, right? So we have listen, locate, and lead. And leading is really the practice that comes down to delivering content and leading the industry, leading our competitors with rich content that's snackable, modular, and is always relevant to the physician's interests, right? And we do this through a couple of ways. One, we have our Practice Share product. Two, we use Field Share, our Speaker Share product, and then our digital agency of record services, right? And this really comes down to taking content, making it highly relevant to a specific physician using locally relevant data and KOL or DOL, digital opinion leader, relationships to ensure engagement with that content. So I'm going to go into detail on all three of these. First is listen, all right? When we sit in a meeting, if we spend our entire time planning what we're going to say to somebody, we're not really in the moment and we're not really listening. And so it takes a lot of practice to be able to sit there and clear your mind and really, really hear what we're saying. And remember that fact that I gave you before, a large percentage of physicians even though they're engaging with the reps, don't feel like the reps are listening to them. They don't really understand what those physician needs are. And so we developed technology starting in about 2016. We call it LexEdge. It's based on word embedding analysis, which is a natural language processing technology that allows us to go out and scrape the web. And so LexEdge is our proprietary machine learning accelerated methodology for commercial lexical analysis. A lot of us are used to doing lexical analysis for the scientific lexicon around a disease or a drug. We use it for content strategy development, channel optimization, and field engagement strategy. What do we need to say to people? How do we need to say it? And how do we need to deliver that messaging? The way we do this is through our word embedding analysis engine, which allows us to rapidly and efficiently analyze very, very large sets of content to uncover rich competitive insights about audience interests and competitors' brand and content strategy. Now, this is something we've had in development for 4 years. We've used it on 5 product launches in the last 18 months, and it has created substantial insights for those brands. Everything from HIV to Alzheimer's to, bipolar 1, schizophrenia, migraine, multiple sclerosis, and ulcerative colitis. So you can see there's a little bit of a neuro slant there, but this is a proven set of technologies that we've been using for quite a long time. So what is our word embedding analysis engine? This is the tool that scrapes a large volume of content and then calculates the relationship between every single term within the universe of content that we scraped and their relevance to each other, as well as its relevance to the source. And so what you're looking at here right now is a demonstration of looking at an analysis around C. diff. C. diff is a recurrent infection in the bowel, a bacterial infection that's the result of too much antibiotic use, right? And here what you're seeing is, okay, we're looking at WebMD, we're looking at Mayo Clinic, we're looking at different competitors, and we're measuring who's most relevant on each one of these topics. Now, what's interesting about this is this takes a 7,000 by 7,000 by, I don't remember what the number is, multi-dimensional matrix of vectors between the terms, and then reduces it down into 3 dimensions and then 2 dimensions so that we can measure relevance very, very quickly. And what you'll see across the bottom is we use lots and lots of different sources to do this. This kind of tool is what allows us to look at very, very large sets of data. I think the largest set of data that we looked at was actually for AstraZeneca and Lynparza several years ago, where we looked at 750,000 customer interactions in order to help them to tune their channel strategy around a new indication launch that wasn't going exactly as planned. LexEdge results in some deliverables for our clients, right? The first one is it's broken down into a slide, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes. It has 3 proprietary indexes. First of all is the discussion index. This is where we go out and look at an arbitrary set of content that might include publications, abstracts, websites, advertising, social media. We scrape up all that content. We run our topic modeling tool, and then topics actually naturally and organically emerge from that ether that show us what the audience that we're interested in is really interested in, right? We then take those topics that emerged organically from all of that content, and then we analyze them in our lexical index. And the lexical index is how frequently do those topics appear within the websites and content of our direct and indirect competitors. So a direct competitor might be another drug or another drug company. An indirect competitor might be Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, some advocacy organization, drugs.com, et cetera, right? And what this allows us to do is say, hey, here are the topics that are important to our audience, discussion index. Hey, here's how these topics emerge and manifest within our direct and indirect competitors' websites. And then the competitive PageRank index actually allows us to take those topics and then measure how frequently and how well our direct and indirect competitors rank on that content. So we understand how competitive it is. These 3 things come together and allow us to really understand what topics do we need to be talking about, exactly how do we need to write about them, and who are they going to impact, right? And how competitive it is. We use quite a lot of data to do this kind of things. In one sample, we used more than 50,000 terms. We looked at 4 different competitors, 9 different websites. We were able to bring that down to about 6,000 terms from the lexical analysis. We looked at 33,000 discussions and more than 50 studies, publications, podcasts, and YouTube videos, right? And so what's nice about this is we really get a cross section of content, right? This can be the websites, it can be Quora, it could be Reddit, it could be Sermo, could be Doximity, could be Facebook, could be Twitter. And we bring all of that content together and we see what topics emerge naturally. So I'm going to pause for 1 second and just let you look at this. This is a typical deliverable, right? Historically, the way we would deliver lexical analysis was as webs of content, and we would give you the relationships. But what we discovered was brand managers had a really hard time figuring out how to make it relevant and how to use it. And so we came up with a whole new idea, right? And this is Lex Edge, right? The first part, which you can see up at the top here, is the key insight, right? Provide culturally relevant resources and messaging to HCPs to drive awareness and willingness to use XYZ brand among Black and Latinx adolescents still disproportionately affected by disease A. This insight was actually emerged having looked at Reddit and Quora data, right? You see news, blog, and search there as your top 3 channels where this topic emerged. And really, the interesting part is it also gave us the ways we need to talk about it. What are the common variants of the content, right? So you see over on the right, Black and adolescent disease A, it occurred 127 times. Disease A among Black and Latino adolescents occurred 90 times. Youth awareness and issues impacting Afro and Latinx youth, that occurred 56 times. In all of the content that we looked at, those 3 variants plus the HCP topic really occurred with enough frequency that we understood that this was something we had to look at more deeply. We then looked at our clients' market research and primary research, and we tie the insight into the study highlights, right? Because we want to understand how this stuff ties into the strategic imperatives and the data that we have already for the brand. Finally, we deliver the thought starters, right? What are the barriers to driving disproportionate prevalence? Is this subpopulation company blah, blah, blah wants to target, and could they win it, right? These are the places where we start to have a collaborative conversation with the client and the other agencies to really push the idea forward. Now, what's interesting is on the right, you can see those indexes, right? These are basically an easy scorecard, right? The discussion index was relatively low, right? In this particular case, this topic only occurred fewer than 500 times across all of the channels that we looked at. The lexical index was low. It occurred fewer than 1,000 times across all the channels. And the competitive page rank was low. In other words, nobody really ranked on the topic. But when we looked at the verbatims that had emerged from the channels that we looked at, we realized it was really, really important, right? And so there's a mix here between technology, understanding the brand, understanding the nuances of the market, and then finding actionable insights from it. And this is where we start to lead. I can think of two other really interesting insights that we learned from lexical analysis. We were doing an analysis for a brand, and we were looking at Reddit and Quora and a bunch of social platforms. And what emerged was adolescents were able to access, the product was being, distributed by pharmacists without the intervention of an HCP, without a script. And the brand managers didn't realize this in 6 states. And what happened was the way we figured it out was we saw data coming from adolescent Black and Latino men, gay men, who were accessing the product without having to talk to their parents and without having to talk to a doctor, right? By going directly to the pharmacists. And it was one of these moments when everyone went, whoa, first of all, I can't believe people are talking about this on the web. And then number 2, what are the insights we can draw from that and use in our marketing, or in going and seeking an additional indication, or how do we engage with those audiences in an appropriate kind of way? There's lots of sort of insights like that emerge naturally. So that's sort of the end of lead, right? How do we use data and technology to look at very, very large sets of data and then listen very closely and gain insights about what to do next? Now we're going to talk about locate, right? And really, locating is about identifying networks of influence and relationships between HCPs in a way that allows us to take action, right? Number one, it allows us to do market selection. Number two, KOL mapping, DOL, digital opinion leader mapping, and what's the probability that the influence is going to have impact? And this comes down to four kind of core parts, right? We have a strategic insight engine, right? It allows us to be predictive, precise, and measurable, right? This is based on about 1.2 million to 1.3 million HCP profiles that we've developed over the last 10 years. It looks at many, many different data sources, some of them public, some of them private, that allows us to map the relationship between physicians, right? And ultimately what it does is it allows us to do data-driven insight generation, right? There's social listening, there's search behavior. We're able to create content strategy. What do we need to be writing about, who and exactly how? We are able to do KOL optimization. And one example of this is we were running emails from KOLs to HCPs, and we were seeing about a 4% open rate on those emails. We then ran a KOL optimization routine, which tied the relationship of the KOL to the individual physician much more tightly. Rather than using a national KOL, we were using local KOLs at this point. And we actually saw open rates go from 4% to 12%. And using this kind of data and that kind of practice, right? And this is the continuous engagement part. Like, you need to be engaged and you need a lot of shots on goal in order to optimize those engagements. We're able to achieve executional excellence. The data that I was referring to, those 1.2 million physicians, has really taught us a number of things. First of all, this is all housed in our elevated relevance platform, right? This is a singular data lake and software layer that we've built over the last couple of years that allows us to look at this data and then take action against it. And it allows us really to do something we call market selection. What markets are most likely to be influenced? Where can we have the most impact? And then who in those markets can have their behavior changed, and who needs to be saying things? One of the interesting things is that the data that we have, because we've been doing local marketing for a long time and regional marketing for a long time, is that the physical distance between a KOL and a physician has a dramatic impact on open rates for email. And so the smaller that distance, the higher the open rate. Now, what does that mean, right? Well, some of us know our top 100 KOLs in the country. We want to move past that and look past that. We want to look at, say, your second 200 or your second 400 KOLs who are operating in very small geographies, right? In small regions, so that we can maximize the impact that those KOLs have on their peers, right? And you need technology to do this at scale, right? And we have that technology, right? It's the elevated relevance platform. We have our KOL finder, and this is a sample of what some of that work looks like, right? This is a very large database that is continuously growing. It allows us to implement scoring algorithms that look deeply at these relationships, both physical relationships. Did they go to the same school? Did they do their residency together? Have they co-published? Do they present together? Are they, researching the same products? And, what are their prescribing patterns? What are their referral patterns? What are their diagnosing patterns? How do these things relate together? And when we put all of that together, we end up with really solid and really useful KOL scoring that allows us to determine who should send the message to which doctors and exactly what do they need to say to generate the most impact. All right. So this brings us to the lead component of our L-Cube framework, right? We had listen, locate, and lead, right? That's, hey, what do we need to be talking about? What are the preferences of our audiences? Locate is who needs to be saying it and who's most likely to be influenced. And lead is really about leading with content. It's really about having a sort of a new perspective on how to deliver content and how to generate content. And how do we create content that is reflective of our audience's behavior? One of the things that we know is that when we craft content using highly reflective language, right? And here's an example, right? So we did a bipolar 1 launch. We were doing an analysis on a very large set of data, and this insight emerged. Bipolar 1's acronym is written in 2 different ways. It's either BP Arabic 1 or BP Roman numeral 1. Now, patients almost always write BP Arabic 1. Physicians almost always write BP Roman numeral 1. Now, What's interesting about that is, first of all, generally we don't get to write the acronym in two different ways, depending on the content we're generating. Number two, when you build the content around that insight and you say, okay, all my patient content is going to be majority BP Arabic 1, and all my physician content is going to be majority BP Roman numeral 1, you actually trigger the algorithms to serve your content to the right audience more efficiently and effectively. And when you craft content like emails and banners, et cetera, the audience engages more deeply with that content. And we believe it's because it is reflective of the way they think about the content and the way they would write about it themselves, right? And those kinds of insights emerge and then need to be carried forward through the lead phase, through the content phase. So I want to share just a couple of case studies here to give you an idea of, what are the common results? What does this look like, right? First of all, we have a product called Field Share. This is a product where the rep is able to trigger an email to a physician following some sort of interaction, right? And this is an automated process. And the rep, the emails come from the reps to the physicians. And it's really using what we call proven formats, right? We're taking the national campaign, we're localizing it with local data, and then we're enabling the reps with data and technology to be able to engage with their physician audiences more effectively than they might through the rep triggered email in Viva or another platform, right? It is an interesting product because it targets, sort of the late stage singlers, sort of two product biotech companies and device companies, right? These are folks who may not have giant Viva installations that have been around for years. The messaging that comes out of this system is actually automatically sent based on triggers, based on the rep's behavior and interactions with the physicians, right? And the content is aligned to these business rules, right? It's not just like, hey, go select from a dropdown, pick this email. It's, hey, what has the rep talked about with the physician? When did the physician last see the rep? Is there another meeting coming? Hey, let's start sending the appropriate messaging on that. And the communications are customized for the field sales team member and the local community, and it really does drive some remarkable results. Now, it really starts with the data, right? What do we know about the physician? What do we know about the rep? What do we know about the product, right? So we take CRM data, we take patient data, we take provider data, we run it through our Field Share engine, and then business rules get applied to the data, which triggers content to go to the physicians in a scheduled way, right? In a predicted way, right? And there's different kinds of business rules. Sometimes it's competitive blunting. Sometimes it's based on predictive analytics. We can actually look at the data and start, very much like, say, Komodo, who's doing predictive analytics, like, hey, where is the patient likely to show up? Who's referring who to pay to the physicians? How can we get in front of that, and how can we affect that? And by intelligently generating and delivering locally relevant, continuous engagement, right? And really, the program that we're talking about here, right? We successfully targeted 8,100 HCPs over a 6-month engagement continuously, right? We resulted in something around 33,000 emails. So, if you do the math on that, that's like between 3 and 4 emails per physician, right? So we're not talking about overwhelming them with content over a 6-month period of time. And the beautiful thing is that it ended up driving 30% HCP penetration, right? It also triggered 1.8% lift. And, it's funny, Frank, you were talking about, 5% lift, 4% lift. Oftentimes, these programs can generate meaningful ROI with low single-digit lift, right? Especially when measured against control markets, right? When we apply these things very, very sort of smartly in the right markets, that lift can be meaningful, right? And, when we looked at overall, it generated about 1%, right? 0.8%. And when we did the calculations and the client led this calculation, we actually saw a 17-to-1 ROI on this particular program, right? And now this is semi-typical. We generally see across all of our programs an average of 7-to-1 ROI. I've actually seen upwards of 40-to-1 ROI, which is pretty insane. I don't think I'll ever see that again. But, by using data and technology, by, really listening to the market, really understanding the relationship between the field sales team member, the speaker, the KOL, the physician, and then crafting highly relevant content and putting it in their inbox in a meaningful way when they need to see it and when they want to see it, you can generate some pretty remarkable results. So what does this look like overall, right? What's the value here? The first is that, what we want to do is unify the best of all the worlds, right? This is, healthcare, life sciences, marketing, communications, digital technology, right? My deep background is software development. I started writing code when I was 1983. I got into healthcare marketing in 2003. And, for me, I like to look at the world in a systems-based way. I like to think about how can we affect behavior using technology? How can we automate these things? And then how can we collect very large sets of data that gives us insights about how to engage with people, right? Because ultimately what we really want to do is delight them, right? We want to create a delightful experience for our physician partners so that they can create a delightful and meaningful and effective relationship with their patients, right? And so what we want to do is bring all of the different disciplines together, right? So we have the data, we have our products, we have our digital agency of record business. When we bring all of that together, we can create an integrated and sort of turnkey set of solutions for our clients that generate results. And what we've done is we've really thought about all of the customer touch points. What are all the places where a brand is going to, sort of interact with an HCP, right? And so we break the world down into 3 parts, right? There's drivers, destinations, and support. Drivers are all of our media channels. And how do we use data and how do we use targeting and really precision targeting to get the right message in front of the right physician at the right time? And then how do we pull them through into an owned and operated property? Now, this is important because third-party data is going away, right? We know that this is happening. Cookies are going away. We've got Apple, who's going to be anonymizing IPs. They're getting rid of tracking pixels. And so what that means for us as a partner to our pharma brands is we need to build first-party owned and operated properties, websites, emails, and destination sort of experiences where we can collect data on the interactions with physicians so that we can build up the customer master record, right? We don't want to have to rely on outside parties to give us the data that we need to make good decisions. And so what do, right? We're building microsites, we're building emails, we're doing, Viva Engage meetings, all of this comes together. We're looking at telehealth, we're pulling data out of our telehealth partners so that we really understand the full stack measurement. What's happening at, say, the programmatic banner level or the paid search level or the paid social level, all the way through to the script and then to the distribution of the product, to the fulfillment of the product to the patient. The next part is all of the beyond the pill work that we're doing, right? It's really important around hub services, around, HCP office support, telehealth, CRM, that we continuously provide value to the HCP, right? And then when we're doing that, how do we pull data out of that so that we can optimize those relationships with those offices and with those networks and with those HCPs in a way that makes their job easier, makes it more likely you're going to prescribe the product, right? And so this is, sort of where all of this data comes to play. And it's beautiful thing is we can really continuously engage across all of these, right? Everything from the banner ad all the way through to telehealth today. And it is really, really remarkable. And when we do that really well, a couple of things happen, right? First of all, across all of our sort of engagements, right? We see average click-through rates of up to 19%. Now, we know the industry standard sort of benchmark is 4%. Well, how do we do it? We build maximally impactful and relevant content. We use exactly the right person to deliver it. And then we time it perfectly so that it gets delivered and the content's relevant. I said open rates. I should have said click-through rates. The open rates that we see right now, I'm correcting myself, 4% is the benchmark for open rates. Sorry, guys. We see between 9 and 18% on the open rates, right? Again, it goes back to what I was saying. Who's going to deliver the message, exactly what's in the message, and then how are we going to test those subject lines and the content in a way that ensures opening? The other piece that I don't think gets talked about enough is understanding email deliverability scores. And one of the things that Relevate Health has done is really developed a practice around email deliverability. And what that means is building algorithms that send email in a way that enhances the email's deliverability score with, folks like Gmail and Microsoft and Outlook. And so that as the email goes through that's likely to be opened, it gets opened, it puts a signal into the system that says these emails are valuable and are being engaged with. And then as we bring in other email behind them to the audience that's less likely to open it, it has a higher email deliverability score so that that email gets delivered, right? So it actually shows up in somebody's inbox. And that's part of the struggle here, right? Not only do you have to build great content, you have to understand the channel, you have to know who needs to send it. You need to have the technology and insights in order to manage the algorithms at the mail companies, Outlook, Gmail, Barracuda, SecureNet, etc. Right? And so when you bring all that together, you end up with some really remarkable stuff. And some of that looks like, average ROI of greater than 7 to 1. And so, Frank, we're going to pull to a close here, right? And I just want to, start where we began, right? The evolution from non-personal to near personal is the evolution from generic national campaigns to highly personalized, locally relevant, HCP-focused content, right? And when we do this, when we make those changes, right, and we apply the technology and the data, we see remarkable results for our client and for our brands. And you can do this as well, with or without us. And so it comes down to the framework, right? First of all, we need to listen more closely to identify HCP needs and expectations. We can use data to do that at scale today. Number two, we need to be able to locate hard to access professionals and then target them with precision. When who is most likely to get the message through becomes the question. Finally, we need to lead with more relevant content to ensure seamless, continuous, and dynamically compelling content at every engagement touch point across the spectrum. And, again, at the listen phase, it's like, hey, what do we need to be writing about? How do we need to write about it? How does this pair up with our strategic imperatives? How does this move the brand forward? We locate, we think through market intelligence, we look at our large sets of data, and we say, okay, if this person delivers this message, it's more likely to get through. And then what does that message need to be? How is it reflective of the national campaign and the messaging the brand needs to get out there? And, if we do that, we're not going to let COVID eat our launch, right? We're going to be successful. We're going to drive results, and it's going to be pretty remarkable. So I went over a little bit more, 4 minutes over what I was hoping to. I really do appreciate the time to share these ideas with you guys. It's been really exciting to develop them and develop the technology. And Frank, do you have any questions for me? Did any questions come through during the session?
I do have a couple questions. And the first is, how is it possible to know this much about our customers?
How is it possible to know? Well, I mean, a lot of the data is available, right? I mean, the CMS data is available. You can buy access to the switches, right? What is interesting is, as we move, there's data, there's information, there's insights, and there's wisdom. We have, as an industry, moved wholly into that information and insights phase, right? Because we're able to aggregate these large sets of data and then continuously add to them in a way that makes it accessible. For instance, a Snowflake database or a Hadoop database is an accessible technology to lots and lots of companies today, and it wasn't 10 years ago. So we can deal with things at scale. Also, I think there's been a marriage between technologists, and marketers and commercial experts, right? People bringing these brands to market in a symbiotic way that allows us to understand these things in ways that we haven't previously. So, a lot of it comes down to technical competence and the evolution of what we've been doing for the last 10 years.
It's fascinating. Every time I learn more about this, I'm fascinated by what's possible. And it is interesting in this cookieless world that we're going into. Why wait? Like, get moving on this pretty soon. So, so Hans, the second question is, are these types of efforts solely focused on very, very large market brands?
No, actually, that's a great question. Thanks for teeing it up, Frank. A lot of this work comes down to asymmetric launches, right? Which is, I think, something you and I have been talking about on and off for a year, right? We have had the opportunity to support a number of brands. I mean, one of the brands was 13th to market, and the second, sort of the second within a novel mechanism of action. that brand is not going to be as dominant as some of the leads in that category, right? We have, we brought a migraine product to market, right, which is up against your Brevly and Neurotech, right, and it's a relatively small product with small budgets, and so what you want to be able to do is use the data in a way to affect an asymmetric launch so that you can drive launch velocity and then be able to reinvest the proceeds, the revenue from that, a successful launch in the limited markets and the asymmetric markets to drive a broader national sort of strategy. And so, yeah, this stuff works really, really well for companies who maybe, 13th to market, maybe a challenger brand, maybe a smaller biotech or device company.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And so, Hans, if folks are feeling some pain inside their organization and they're looking for a new solution, or they just want to blow results out of the water and they want to learn more, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, a couple of ways. One, they can email us. They can email me, hans@arteric.com, ARTERIC.com. They could just contact you, Frank, because you know how to get a hold of me, and they're all going to be a part of the Arsenal Nation already, right?
Right.
Or you guys can look me up on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy. I'm pretty accessible. And, listen, the thing that excites me most and sort of in the role of chief innovation officer is really being an evangelist for change and being out in the market, talking to people, is having these experiences, these one-on-one or one-on-many experiences where there's an exchange of ideas, right? We don't have all the answers. I know that we don't. I've been in this long enough to know that I don't. And so that's why I'm a part of Arsenal Nation, right? I mean, ultimately, it's the exchange of ideas. It's this rich sort of progression, right? And so, hey, listen, if you want to talk about this stuff, just reach out to me. I'm happy to go to virtual coffee. I don't know if we can go to coffee yet, but eventually we will go to coffee again.
We can't wait for that day for sure. Well, on behalf of Arsenal Nation, Hans, I just wanted to say thank you for your time and treasures here. This has meant an awful lot. This is a topic that's on everyone's mind, and anything that we thought we had figured out is about to change with some of the big internet companies changing the playing field for sure. So, Hans, any closing thoughts here before we wrap up?
Well, first, I want to thank you and the team for putting the event together. Number two, please do reach out to us at Relevate Health. We look forward to helping you guys affect a strong brand launch or brand growth, right? It's what gets us up in the morning. It's our oxygen. So look forward to working with you guys. And thanks for your time, Frank.
Oh, hey, we look forward to keeping the conversation going. So everyone, thank you very much. And we'll see you in the next session. Thanks, Hans.
Thanks, Frank.